nerdy Halisimmer.
Hey guys, welcome to a new series that is called Freeware Gems, and today we'll take a look at the Freeware OH-58 Kiowa by Bell Helicopters, which has recently been released by KarL. It has rocket parts, it has an MG, and it has that charming used look that you would expect a veteran military aircraft to have. The light reconnaissance helicopter features a mast-mounted sight on top of the four-bladed rotor head. I do not know too much about this aircraft, however there are people that do, and one of them is the developer KarL. At least that's the name that he goes by in the Explain forum. He's a very active member and a real-life helicopter pilot himself. Some of you might remember that Polychop Simulations announced the release of a Kiowa for DCS for the late year of 2020. However, after a few very promising YouTube videos, the release date was postponed and it has become silent around Polychop. So now we have a Kiowa for Explain, and it is freeware. I just downloaded it and I want to take you along on my first flight. Circuit breakers are not operable, but that can be expected with a freeware aircraft. I figured the most interesting thing for you guys is how does it fly, so I skipped the startup procedure. But for those of you who are interested, I'm going to add a startup at the end of the video. The interiors are pretty detailed and good for a freeware aircraft. The panels are kept dark and featureless, which is pretty typical for military aircraft. Also, the Kiowa features a glass cockpit with some backup analog gauges. Now for my first pickup, I expect the aircraft to hover a little bit left skid low and nose high, so I'm going to pull aft on the cyclic and displace it to the left a little bit. The Kiowa has a stability augmentation system, so I expect it to be rather easy to fly. And yes, it is. It seems to be a little bit sensitive on the pitch axis, however very stable. Let's do a pedal turn here and creep over to the runway. You can see that it hovers a little bit left skid low as expected. In the manual it states that you should have a constant frame rate of at least 30 frames per second to enjoy realistic handling characteristics. This can be rather hard to achieve on weaker systems, seeing as the aircraft has to be run at a frame rate hungry setting of 5 flight model calculations per second. I'm still trying to balance out the helicopter. I seem to have quite a bit of lateral oscillations here. The sounds are okay. I don't really have a reference. I don't know what a Kiowa sounds like. There is a noticeable difference in the sound mix when you change from the exterior view to the cockpit view, so that's a good thing. And as you might have noticed, there is some stereo panning going on when you move your virtual head. However, I find it a little bit overdone. You should never have complete silence in one of the channels. Sounds unnatural. Whoops, not exactly above the taxiway center line here. Still struggling a little bit with the translating tendency. Let's put it down. Yep, it's pretty stable, however, as I said, a little bit sensitive on the pitch axis. However, not very sensitive on the roll axis. That's interesting. I'm still not on the ground. Apparently I'm not used to flying helicopters with low skids. Alright, there is a sound for the skids touching down. Quite a lot of them actually. Alright, first impressions. It's very stable with the SAS, very easy to fly. However, I still need to get used to the fact that the pitch axis is rather sensitive, while the roll axis is rather sluggish. Let's pick her up again. The amount of pedal input seems about right. Increasing collective and waiting for effective translational lift, the extra amount of lift that a helicopter gets once it accelerates past about 20 knots. Yep, here it comes. It seems to be there. Let's do a rather tight turn here. Now for your convenience, the developer has added a 700 pages strong original manual of the aircraft. However, if you understandably do not want to work that hard, he's also added a simulation manual which gives you a quick start checklist and explains the most important instruments. But even that manual amounts to about 55 pages, I believe. This amount of documentation and information is quite exceptional for a Freeware aircraft. Cruising along at 80 knots, however, there's still a lot more engine power that I can pull, so let's accelerate. About 100 knots can be expected from a Kiowa. Now let's head back to the airport and check the decel. If you wondered, the scenery that I use here is Bora Bora by Maps2 X-Plane, the same guys that also brought to you the Faroe Islands as well as the Seychelles scenery. I already slowed the helicopter down. Decel feels quite natural. And so far I didn't notice any excessive floating issues. After all, that's something that a few helicopter flight models suffer from in X-Plane. Due to the SAS, it pretty much feels like an airplane. Now there is a little feature added, I'm going to show you later on in the startup sequence, which is called the training wheels. So if you're a beginner with helicopters, you can pull out the vent on the pilot side, and that will have an effect on the stability augmentation system. So if you pull it all the way out, the aircraft becomes even more stable than it is right now. There is a blade slap sound coming in. After all, they put quite some effort into the sound design. If this was payware, I would say that the sound quality could be a little bit better. But where would you go to record a real-life Kiowa? I'm gonna set it down now, and then I'm gonna try the flight model without the SAS and try flying it a little bit more military style. It's hard to tell what will become of the Kiowa for DCS by Polychop. The release date has been postponed, so there seems to have been some hiatus in the development schedule. We'll see. Right, on to the second part, a little bit more military action. You can choose from the rocket pods or from the machine gun. And I will also try out the helicopter without the stability system activated. I'm gonna switch off the power, and then I need to acknowledge the alarm. What we see on the MFD is most probably our mast-mounted sight. Handling without the SAS is not too different, a little bit more lively, I'd say. I appreciate that. I never really got around to the feel of stabilized aircraft with an X-plane. So let's do a little NOE flying, which is short for Nap of the Earth. That means flying at low altitudes, hugging the terrain and hiding between hillsides, mountains and trees, so we cannot easily be seen by the enemy. Sound design gets more and more convincing, I have to say. We can now hear the sound of the oncoming air hitting the fuselage coming into the mix. If you want to make use of the weapons, make sure you have a joystick button assigned to the fire command. Now you also have to activate the weapon system and put it into the armed mode. So let's try the rockets here. That worked well, however it's quite a bit more difficult if you want to hit a specific target. Now as of now, of course, I do not know how deep the simulation of the combat systems runs with this flight model. Working through the 700 pages of the Operation Handbook would be a little bit beyond the scope of this video. For those of you guys that have already tried out the Kiowa and know a little bit more about what else it can do, please feel free to let me know in the comments. So I'm going to switch over my weapon selection to the machine gun. In the most recent version of that freeware, which is 2.0 I believe, there are some systems that are not simulated yet. These mainly consist of systems for the left seat operator, which would be the pilot in command, I think that's what they're called. I will overfly that ridge at close range and drop down behind it. Make sure to drop your collective so the aircraft doesn't go into overspeed. I don't know if retreating blade stall is simulated. So this seems like a very powerful aircraft. Then again, we are not fully loaded. So if you take a look at my cyclic, you can see that you can handle the aircraft rather roughly while maneuvering. It is actually a lot of fun to fly. Probably should be more active on the pedaling. So the system depth is quite impressive for a freeware aircraft, so kudos to KarL. Of course, X-Plane is not a combat simulator, so flying military missions is somewhat bound to your imagination, I would say. Let's try a spot turn 180. Pull aft on the cyclic, lower the collective, the aircraft will climb and lose speed, and then it should naturally enter a right yaw. Stopping the yaw movement with left pedal input and then enter a dive. Now I would be really interested in how similar the Kiowa handles to its relatives, the Bell 206 and the Bell 407. With it being heavier and being equipped with an SAS, I'd imagine it's less sensitive than the other two, which this model definitely is. So all in all, it is very easy and fun to fly, and this flight model offers a huge amount of functionality for a freeware aircraft. It also comes with a good sound set, operational weapon systems, and a large amount of documentation, so you can really dive into what this aircraft is all about. So this definitely is a freeware gem. You can get it on the X-Plane forum, just browse the rotorcraft section in the downloads area. It doesn't seem to need a lot of right pedal input when the collective is down. It actually seems to need a little bit more left pedal here. Alright, after landing here at this little harbor, I'm going to take you through the startup procedure. Not through the complete procedure, which can be painstakingly long, I believe, but through the quick start procedure that you can find in the manual. Alright, let's start this thing up from cold and dark. I'm going to use the quick start checklist referenced in the manual. If you're interested in a more thorough review on how to start up a Kiowa, I recommend a YouTube video by a guy named Barundus. He's an ex-Kiowa pilot and he also helped the Polychop team on their development for the TCS Kiowa. I'm going to put a link into the description. First thing to check is that the fuel cutoff lever found up here is in the forward position, which it is by default. Next thing is to switch on the battery. There is a preheat function, probably for when it's cold outside, I don't know. So battery switch to on. Whoops, sorry about that. Once the MFD has warmed up, we're going to hear a series of warning alarms or warning horns that you can silence by pressing the acknowledge button on the center pedestal here. Now if you flip the switch up, you can recall caution advisories that you have already acknowledged. Let's go on. Next thing on the checklist is setting our standby altimeter. I'm going to set it to field elevation, which should be 0 feet above main sea level. Checking the free movement of the controls now. I do have an issue on startup with my cyclic, but more on that later. I'm going to check movement of the collective and the anti-torque pedals. Another weird thing that I noticed is that if I roll on my hardware throttle, the virtual equivalent immediately moves to a position way past the idle stop latch, which most probably would result in a hot start. So I'm going to leave it at flight idle for my startup here. Not sure what's up with that. I've recalibrated my throttle, but still to no avail. Next step is activating the anti-collision lights. So everyone on the ground knows that we're about to start the engine. Now for the essential bus switch on the overhead panel. In the Kiowa, the DC generator works as a generator or as the starter motor depending on which position the switch is in. For startup, it should be in the start position, which means that the battery feeds the generator to crank up the engine. And once the engines are running, we're going to switch it into the run position, which means that the DC generator is supplying the essential bus with electricity while recharging the battery. Now we go over to the MPD, the multi-parameter display, which you can find below the analog gauges. I'm going to switch on the MPD backup, which adds an additional line on our MFD, the multi-function display, showing us the mass torque, the engine torque, as well as RPMs. You can initiate a built-in self-test BIT to test the systems, which should result in a pass. Now for checking the operability of our digital gauges, everything should light up. On the right hand side of the MPD there is a digital display that shows you one of the parameters listed below, and you can browse through them by flipping the switch, and the yellow light will indicate what the display will show you. For startup, it should be in the position battery voltage, starter voltage. Now the display shows the battery voltage, which should be no less than 21 volts. We got 24, so we're good. Now you can pull out this vent on the pilot side to increase stability augmentation of the flight model. However, it should be pushed all the way in for realistic results. This is sort of an arcade mode for beginners. The fuel norm analog backup switch should be up, so just make sure that this guard is closed. Cyclic centered, collective full down, and the throttle is fully closed. Now the Kiowa has an ignition key, so if there's no key, nothing will happen. You can find it just beside the collective here. Next step, fuel boost pumps to on. You find that on the overhead panel. Now we're about ready to start the engines. I'm going to take a quick look around the helicopter to make sure that the area is clear, as you would do in real life. Here's what you need to do. Press the starter and keep it pressed until NG is at 55%, so the engine is self-sustaining. You can read the NG value in this display here. At 12% NG, you have to induce fuel. But before you do that, you will check that the voltage of the battery is no less than 14 volts. And the TGT, the turbine temperature, is not above 150 degrees. The battery drainage is normal after all the battery energizes the starter motor. Alright, here we go. Pressing the starter. Battery voltage and turbine gas temperature within limits. And there she goes. We see a TGT over temp warning on the MFD, which is unpleasant. Once the TGT rises above 800 degrees, it will show you that. However, I don't think it is a problem because it was a very short period of time. However, you should never exceed the markings S and T up here for more than 1 second, or you will seriously damage the engine. NG is at 55%. I can let go of the starter now. Checking that all the instruments are in the green, which they are, except for the rotor RPM NR up there on the vertical scale instruments. It's in the red, which is normal. After all, we're at ground idle. The blue lights below the digital gauges indicate that they are energized. Alright, at ground idle, NG should stabilize around 63 to 65%. Next step, DC and AC generators to on. I'm gonna go to the overhead panel and activate both the DC and the AC generator. And we will also put the essential bus switch into the run position now that our engines are running. An essential bus is an electrical bus supplying the most essential instruments or systems of an aircraft. Next step, push to uncage the standby attitude indicator or artificial horizon. And then activate the SAS system. You find the SAS control panel just below the MPD. You're going to power it to on and then activate the pitch and roll channel as well as the yaw channel. Also make sure that the hydraulics are on. We can activate the force trim. Now we will slowly open the throttle to maximum. We will see an increase in torque. Just make sure that while you roll on the throttle you do not exceed a value of 40% torque, or the aircraft might move while it's on the ground. Alright, we're at flight idle. However, there is a weird thing. Once I roll on my hardware throttle, my cyclic freezes up. I'm currently moving my hardware cyclic, but nothing seems to happen in the sim. Don't know what that is all about. I don't have that problem with other aircraft. It might be an issue with my controller bindings. I don't know, I have to check that out. Now we're going to use the RPM increase switch on the collective to set the RPM to 395. You can find that value up here on the MFD. If you can't find it on your display, remember to push the MFD backup switch on the MPD. Now that was a little bit much, 399. 398, still a little bit less. Now that's it, 395, roughly amounting to 101%. on the vertical scale instrument. We have to activate the IR jammer. I don't know what that is, but I would guess it's an infrared jammer, maybe protecting you from heat-seeking missiles. Now you'll find it above your head. I guess base means that the infrared jammer is switched off because you probably do not want to disturb any technology in your home base. So put it into the IR jammer position, and on the overhead panel put this switch into the transmitter position. Now would be the time to enter important data for your missions, which you can do via the keyboard on the main pedestal. You can navigate through the pages of the MFD by using the buttons left, right, and below the screen. Can't tell how much of the real-life functionality of this system is simulated, however it seems quite substantial. I'm going to select communications in IFF. This is our transponder system, activated by setting it from standby to norm. And the M3A+C is the equivalent to the civilian mode Charlie. I think IFF stands for Identifying Friend from Foe, which would be quite important in a military context, so you don't get hit by friendly fire. I just put the laser switch into the standby mode, and now I'm setting the mass-mounted side into the forward position. That's the round googly-eyed thing on top of our main rotor hub. Master weapon switch into standby mode. If you want to use the weapons, you have to arm them later on. And don't forget to set a fire switch to one of your joystick buttons. So that's it, we started the OH-58 Kiowa from cold and dark. We're about ready to go. You can activate the lights if you want. Very realistic startup procedure. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think of this freeware gem in the comments, and I hope to see you around next time.